Algebra 2 Part 2. This is the second day of 831. We're solving equations that are quadratic in form. So reminder about these things: the greatest exponent is double your exponent on your middle term, and you can use your exponent on your middle term in your parentheses when you factor. And a lot of these we can solve like quadratics, and we can go ahead and factor them to solve. So that was a lot of stuff that we reviewed from yesterday, and so we're just going to jump into the classwork today. So we'll start with number 4, and for number 4 we have x to the 4th minus 29x squared plus 100 is 0. Okay? So this is something that we can factor with first and last. So first is going to be 1, last is going to be 100, and then in the middle we have negative 29. So we'll have 1 and 1, and then two factors of 100. We'll try negative 25 and negative 4. We can cross multiply those, and we get 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. 1 times negative 25 is negative 25. Add those up, and we get negative 29. So then in our parentheses, the variable in the exponent that we'll take is this x squared. So I'll have x squared minus 25, and then x squared minus 4 is 0. Okay, and then we can separate these. So then I get x squared minus 25 is 0, and x squared minus 4 is 0, and solve both of these. So I'll add 25, so x squared is 25, and then I can, let's see, I'm running out of room, so I'll kick this over here. And so if I have x squared is 25, I can take the square root of both sides, and then x is plus or minus 5. And then down here, with the x squared minus 4 is 0, I can add 4 to both sides. I get x squared is 4, and then this is something that I can kick over here. And so if x squared equals 4, I can take the square root of both sides, and I get x is plus or minus 2. So my 4 solutions: x is plus or minus 5, and x is plus or minus 2. Alright, so moving on to number 5. So for number 5, we're going to have x to the 4th minus 8x squared minus 9 is 0. So again, we'll try to solve this with first and last. So first is 1, last is negative 9, and then in the middle we'll have negative 8. So we'll do 1 and 1. For negative 9, we'll do negative 9 and positive 1. So if I cross multiply, 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times negative 9 is negative 9. I can add those up, and I get a negative 8. Alright, so in my parentheses, again I'm going to have a variable in the exponent from the middle term. So I'll have x squared minus 9, and then x squared plus 1 is 0. So separating these, I have x squared minus 9 is 0, and x squared plus 1 is 0. Okay, so on the equation on the left side, I can add 9 to both sides, and I get x squared equals 9. And then if I go ahead and kick this up here, so x squared equals 9, and I take the square root of both sides, and x is plus or minus 3. On the other side, I can subtract 1, x squared is negative 1, okay, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll move this over here, and I'll go ahead and I'll take the square root of both sides. So square root of x squared is the square root of negative 1. So the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of negative 1 is positive or negative I. So your solutions, plus or minus 3, and positive and negative I. Okay. Going on to number 14. So for 14, we have x to the 4th minus 1, 0. Okay, so factoring this, well, this is going to factor into x squared plus 1, and then x squared minus 1 is 0. So if I try to work with this x squared plus 1 first, I can set that equal to 0, and then I can also take this x squared minus 1 and set that equal to 0. So for x squared plus 1 equals 0, well, I'll subtract 1 from both sides. I get x squared is negative 1. Let's take the square root of both sides, and I get x is plus or minus I, right? Because the square root of negative 1 is just I. On the other side, I can add 1, and I get x squared equals 1, and then take the square root of both sides, and I get x is plus or minus 1. So your 4 solutions are plus or minus I and plus or minus 1. And then we've got a similar process with number 15. So for number 15, we have x to the 4th minus 16 is 0. So this is going to factor into x squared plus 4, and then x squared minus 4 is 0. Okay, so separating both of these, so I'll get x squared plus 4 is 0, and x squared minus 4 is 0. So on the left, if I subtract 4, I have x squared is negative 4, and then if I try to take the square root of that, I'll get x is positive or negative 2i, right? Because the square root of negative 4 is an I, or 2i. And then on the right side, I can add 4, so I get x squared equals 4. Take the square root of both sides, and I get x is plus or minus 2. So your solutions, plus or minus 2i and plus or minus 2. Alright, let's go on to number 9. So we're backtracking a little bit, but that's okay. Just a little out of order by the numbers, but we're still in order with our sequence. So we have w minus 5w to the 1/2 plus 4 is 0. Okay, so we've got this exponent of 1/2. Well, that's okay, because your greatest exponent is 1. That's on top of the w, you just can't see it, and 1/2 is double 1. So we'll go ahead and work with things that way. So factoring with first and last, first is 1, last is 4, and then in the middle is negative 5. So factors of 1 are 1 and 1. Factors of 4 are going to be negative 4 and negative 1. If we cross multiply, 1 times negative 1 is negative 1, and then 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. And we add that up, and we'll get negative 5. So then putting things in parentheses, we can have w to the 1/2 minus 4 times w to the 1/2 minus 1. And that whole thing equals 0. And then remember, we separate each one of these and solve them. So w to the 1/2 is the same thing as the square root of w minus 4. And then on the other side, we'll have the square root of w minus 1 equals 0. Okay, so you can rewrite both of them as square roots. So on the left, we can add 4. So I have the square root of w is 4, and then square both sides. And we'll get 16. So one solution, w equals 16. On the other side, we can add 1. Square root of w is 1. We will square both sides, and we get w is equal to 1. Okay, so your two answers here, 16 and 1. Alright, and then the last problem, number 18, we can go back, we can keep factoring with first and last. Excuse me. So for 18, we have x minus 5x to the 1/2 plus 6 is 0. Okay, so this is similar to the problem we just did in that our exponent on x, or our first term, is 1. We just can't see it. And then your exponent in the middle is the 1/2. So if I factor with first and last, first is 1, last is 6, and then in the middle we have negative 5. So we'll do 1 and 1. Two factors of 6, we'll do negative 2 and negative 3. If we cross multiply, 1 times negative 3 is negative 3, and then 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. And we add that up, and we'll get negative 5. So my solution, throwing that in, and then what I'm going to use for my variable, my exponent, is this x to the 1/2 in the middle. So I'll have 1x to the 1/2 minus 2 times 1x to the 1/2 minus 3 equals 0. So I have x to the 1/2 minus 2 and x to the 1/2 minus 3. So let's see, we can rewrite this, oops, and both of these equal 0, sorry. So we can rewrite these x to the 1/2 as the square root of x minus 2 is 0, and then I have the square root of x minus 3 is 0. Okay, so on the left equation I'm going to add 2, so I get the root x is equal to positive 2, and then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll square both sides, and so I get x is 4. On the other side, I can go ahead and add 3, and I have the square root of x is 3, and then try to square both sides, and I get x is 9. So my two solutions are 4 and 9. Okay, so that's it for the classwork, and so hopefully after 2 days of practice, you're good again to go ahead and do the homework.